apologise for the hippy-dippy trippy stuff, but I am trying to enhance my calm and that of anyone who might watch this video. I want to follow up a little on the whole consent in gaming thing. That was brought up, and of course immediately put a rabid cat amongst the fat pigeons. This is a thing that is supposed to foster understanding and caring and tolerance within games and around tables. It's meant to ensure that everybody has a good time. And the intent there is very good. In practice, however, as I think we're seeing in the reaction to it, it only creates more vectors of conflict, and it creates a rigid structure that usually is, fairly stifling to people's creativity. I think there is a difference between working within certain artificial restrictions, as you might in a haiku with the 575 structure, right? That can inspire creativity to find ways around it, to convey meaning in 17 syllables is very difficult. I think it's the difference between that and a game or a free-flowing sort of form of fictional construction, like a story, like a tabletop game, like a film, whatever. The restrictions are often extremely arbitrary and artificial. When you're dealing with these kind of restrictions, when it's censorship of language or content, and it's set and defined within age brackets or unrated, you still have the freedom to break out of those brackets if you need to, and there's a certain amount of leeway in give and take, but it's predictable. That's the other part of it. If you're halfway through writing your haiku and someone suddenly switches it to 57512 or something, that's throwing you off from what you were working on. I understand, and I thought I made the effort to state why and how I understood why some people thought this was a good idea, why some people continue to think that this is a good idea, and that I understood that they were coming from a good place. But there has been no reciprocity in that understanding. No attempt has been made to understand my objections. I do also understand the objections of some of the more reactionary people, but my negative reaction does not come from the same place as them. My concern is always for creativity, story, quality of play, and creative freedom. And this wouldn't be an issue, again, if these kind of tools, these kind of ideas were purely optional. And lots of people are saying, what are you worried about? It's optional. But increasingly conventions and now companies are coming out in support of these things, and it's becoming either a tacit or an explicit expectation for people that these tools should be in play, that they should be able to disrupt the game at any point that they want. There are conventions that are already forcibly implementing these policies. And I know it's an unpopular example, but it's the most recent one that most people know. But there was the Games Master, Kevin Rolfe, at UK Games Expo, who ran afoul of this. He advertised the game clearly as mature, as horror, using a horror system, albeit normally a more gentle horror system, and saying exactly what kind of childish, laddish, sex comedy humour was going to be involved in it. So he did everything right in forewarning people, giving a content warning, all of it. And yet they've still been banned from the convention and everything else. Why? Because they subjectively interpreted an event that didn't even happen on screen as being a violation or something that they needed to specifically consent to. And the stories got completely out of hand. that there were children in play, that their characters were anally raped, the characters were adults, the players were adults. The way to solve this would be to bring it up at the table or just after the game, or to just say, I don't think this game is for me, and walk away. But no. Structures like this being brought in officially at conventions and enforced upon games masters and players are being used as a license to persecute and harangue and harass. When I object to something like this, the assumption seems to be that I am objecting to it because I don't think consent is a good thing. That's not it. Just because it titles itself Consent in Gaming doesn't mean it's actually about consent in gaming. Just because something is called an anti-harassment policy doesn't mean it's actually about harassment. Was the Patriot Act about patriotism? Was Operation Enduring Freedom about enduring freedom? To name a thing seems to shape people's consciousness around it in a certain way, but it doesn't tell you necessarily very much about the substance of the thing. So this claims to be about consent in gaming, but in practice, whether it's the intention or not, it is about prioritizing the single individual and their issues over the collective enjoyment of many others. It becomes a de facto content restriction, and it affects people who would never use it because it becomes imposed. I don't think you should impose this. If you want to use these tools at your table, if you want to use these tools at your table at a convention, then fine. But it's not just about consent. Anti-harassment policies are not just about harassment. They are used intentionally or otherwise as content restrictions. I've related the story before, but the last Dragon Meet I went to some years ago now, and this is part of the reason I don't go to conventions. It's too dangerous to invest the money in if there's going to be one arsehole abusing the terms and conditions of the convention to persecute someone. Yeah, for whatever reason, I'm a target for a lot of people. But the last one that I went to, they had just cut and pasted basically the geek feminism wiki version of an anti-harassment policy. And me and a few others went through this policy, and then we looked around all the stands in the trade section, the games that were being played and so on. And technically, about 80 to 90% of the stalls, products, games were in violation of the strict letter of these rules. And so if someone had chosen to be an arse, like they chose to be an arse at UK Games Expo, the people running the convention probably would have felt that their hands were tied and they had to throw people out. So here's the thing. If I object to this document, this consent in gaming document, it's not because I object to the idea of consent. It's not because I want to go around ruining people's day or forcing them to engage in roleplay activities that they wouldn't want to. That's not it at all. What I'm concerned is that I do not consent to these rules. I do not consent to having my game ruined by people forcing these kind of things on me. I do not consent to your consent rules. I do not consent to sacrificing everybody else's fun for the sake of one person who should have the responsibility to take care of their own mental well-being. And as someone with mental health issues who reads a lot of the literature around these sort of things, particularly with reference to anxiety and depression, but others as well, my reading tells me that this kind of mollycoddling does not help. And my experience suggest to me that this kind of mollycoddling doesn't help. And I try to take responsibility for my own issues and not to allow them to ruin other people's fun. And I don't think it's that unreasonable to expect other people to take the same path as me. And yeah, it's all down to choice. There is often no choice here. This gets imposed on us at conventions, in game stores, and now in the text of games, creating an expectation that anyone can ruin a game at the drop of a hat for any reason without having to give an explanation. And there are examples of people doing this. You look on Twitter, I know Twitter, and you'll find endless examples of people complaining about convention games or store games or games that they were playing in that they felt so utterly triggered by. But when you drill down into it, there's usually nothing really there, or it's probably a simple misunderstanding, but there's no forgiveness, no attempt to dialogue with the other side. They just go and they complain on social media. And that can often ruin people's lives these days, give them reputations as creeps or Nazis or whatever else the case might be. And that's not fair, and this is only reinforcing that. Look, I'm repeating myself, but look, just because something is titled something nice and fluffy and wonderful that everyone can agree with, it doesn't mean the content is that, or that the effect when this thing is enforced is that. It's titled Consent in Gaming, but it's about imposing and forcing ideas onto others, typically the majority, around a table. The anti-harassment policies say they're about harassment, but they're mostly not. When you go through the text, they're about restricting people's creativity, not allowing certain art, not allowing certain topics. It's creating secular taboos. And this is fiction. There is nowhere safer to explore things that you find difficult. There is no relation between this fiction and reality. You can play characters utterly diametrically opposed to what you are in real life. I am regrettably utterly heterosexual, but my character in Call of Cthulhu that we're playing at the moment is gay, which is not an easy thing in the 1920s, and I expect the games master will bring that up. I embrace the opportunity to play things outside my comfort zone in terms of character, conflict, and so on, and a lot of people do. And just because we object to this stuff doesn't mean we're some sort of reactionary conservative. In my case, quite the opposite. I'm a libertine, I'm an explorer, I'm a creative person, and I resent your attempts to control me. Zang.
Word to your mom, came to drop off. Got more rhyme than the Bible got song. Just like the prodigal son not returned. Anyone stepping to me, they getting worse. 'Cause I got lyrics, but you ain't got none. You come to battle, bring a shotgun.
I can make it happen. I can get you anything you want. You just have to talk to me. Talk to me. Talk to me. Talk to me. I'm your priest. I'm your shrink. I'm your main connection to the switchboard of souls. I'm the magic man. The Santa Claus of the subconscious. You say it. You even think it. Yeah, it